Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. Fantastic. How's everybody doing tonight? Sorry, I had my YouTube video open. Welcome to class tonight. How's everybody doing? Can you hear me? If you can, go ahead and type me a hello in the chat bar. Looks like we have Lizette, Kaylee, of course, Soyuz. Fantastic. Lizette, it's good to see you. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to the review session. Fantastic. Okay. Looks like we've got 5 people here tonight. You know what? 5 is a good crowd, so let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Okay. Naya, Carla, Nicole. Livy 403 is here. Okay, fantastic. A lot of great people here. Welcome to the audience. Hello, Mr. Is that in mixing? Is that you, Mr. Nixon? Fantastic grins. Good to see you. Okay. Well, we're getting kind of a crowd here. Fantastic. Let's go ahead. Let me get back to the final exam review. Okay. So here we are talking about the exam review that's coming up this week. Remember, the testing window is December 1st through December 10th. It must be taken on campus. No exceptions whatsoever. Does everybody know when their exam time is? Is there anyone who doesn't know? If you don't know when your exam time is, you should be able to go straight to the Smarter Proctoring link in your Blackboard class. And I've been told if you click on that link, it will take you back to the Smarter Proctoring tool, which is what you're going to need. Okay? So if you've forgotten your time, just go back and do that. All right? Hello, Gloria Turner. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight. So that's the testing window. Now the test format is going to be 79 questions, 100 minutes, mostly multiple choice. There'll be a few matching and some true false. Now I know this is a big exam and it covers a lot of chapters. So I've got a very detailed PowerPoint study guide. So there's pretty much one question per bullet point unless it's otherwise noted. Okay, and to make this even easier, wherever you see the red questions or the red bullet points in this PowerPoint lecture, that will actually represent the questions verbatim. I actually took the exact question off of the exam and put it on the review sheet for you. Does anybody have any questions so far? If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat bar. I'm hoping my sound comes out well enough. I'm using my B camera tonight. My good camera's broken, so I don't look as handsome as normally. If you'll see, I've got my emergency phone down here. If you get to the testing center and there is a problem at all, please use my mobile number. I'm going to be monitoring my phone number all during the testing window, so if you have any problems, please let me know. All right. Fair enough. Let's go on to the exam review. All right, so I'm going to take probably about 5 questions from each chapter with the exception of chapters 1, 2, and 3, because those are sort of foundational chapters. Moreover, the things that I'm talking about in chapter 1 and chapter 3 recur throughout the book. So the subfields of psychology that are discussed in chapter 1, you will see them again and again in the over the course of the class. And so I'm going to ask you questions about these 6 different subfields of psychology. I want you to know what a biopsychologist is, what a developmental psychologist does, what a health psychologist does, a cognitive psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and an experimental psychologist. Can somebody in the chat bar tell me, what does an experimental psychologist study? And I'll wait for the answer, see if anybody is smart enough to get that one tonight. Hello, Jay Ford. Thank you for joining us, my friend. Always good to have you. Can anybody type in the chat bar and tell me, what does an experimental psychologist study? Let's see if somebody will answer it. Da, 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 da. I'll wait for somebody to type that in the chat bar, but I'm going to want you to know examples of these 6 different kinds of psychologists. I might give you, actually, and it's usually going to be a description of what they're doing, and you're going to have to tell me which psychologist would be interested in that. So nobody's going to answer my question. What does an experimental psychologist do? Oh, my goodness. Memory, learning, perception, attention, and emotion. Janice, what do we think?
Wow.
Janice says, wow. Okay, congratulations. They study sensation and perception. Absolutely. Good job, Lucy Purr. Now, also, you see a red-lettered question here. I am going to want you to tell me where the 2 most common locations that you will find a psychologist at. Okay, and you'll see they are in the green and blue areas. This is a university, a 2-year university, but doggone it, I'm here. Do they study human behavior? Oh, no, I'm so sorry. They're more interested in sensation, perception, and consciousness. I'm your hero, but a good guess anyhow, no big deal. Now let's go on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2 has 6 questions. I'm going to ask you to identify an example of a case study. I'm going to ask you to identify an example of an experiment and a correlational study. Now, we looked at correlations, case studies, and experiments throughout the semester, so I'm going to bring one of those to your attention and ask you to tell me what that was. For example, Jeannie. Was Jeannie a case study, an experiment, or a correlational study? Can somebody type in the chat bar and let me know? What was her study? Let's see what we've got. Can anybody answer that? In the meantime, if you remember, we focused in Chapter 2. Yes, Otis, Mr. Nixon, not Otis Nixon. Good God, that was a baseball player. I'm sorry, buddy. Yes, it is located on Blackboard. Holy cow. Anshika says case study. Janice, what do we say?
Wow.
Holy cow. Janice liked it as well. Fantastic. Congratulations, Anshika. It was a case study. All right, and Jay Ford got it right too. Now, also, I'm going to ask you to apply the 3 principles of ethical behavior in a case study. So if you remember, we looked at Jeannie's case and we talked about the ethical principles. And I'm going to ask you to be able to know where autonomy, beneficence, and justice would be applied in her case. I can't tell on the PowerPoint that I'm using right now, but I think this is actually the video that I presented in week 2. We got a couple of people with the case study. Good job. Now, does anybody have any questions on Chapter 2? You'll notice we have 6 bullet points and we have 6 questions. So I'm going to ask you a question about a case study, a question about an experiment, a question about a correlational study. All right. Fantastic. Now, can anybody tell me, was Harry Harlow's study, was that an experiment or a correlational study? Interesting question. I'll let you stew with that for a moment, and I'm going to move on to Chapter 3 in case nobody has, if nobody has questions. All right. If you remember chapter 3, in week 3, we talked about biological psychology. Okay, and I introduced you to a bunch of areas in the brain, uh, a bunch of areas in the brain that control certain behaviors, and we talked about them over the course of the semester. So I introduced you to these 8 terms, and then we talked about the amygdala. We talked about the amygdala in chapter 3. It was in chapter 10, motivation and emotion, but we didn't talk about it then. We did talk about the hippocampus, if you'll remember that, the cerebellum in chapter 8 when we were talking about memories. We talked about the occipital lobe when we were talking about vision in chapter 5. We mentioned the suprachiasmatic nucleus in chapter 4 when we were talking about sleeping and waking. And then we mentioned the frontal lobe, Broca's area, and Wernicke's area during week 3. Most of these we had videos for. Okay, and so I'm going to want you to tell me what each and one of these areas did. I see we have a couple of people making the comment that they thought Harry Harlow's study was an experiment. Good guess. It was actually more of a correlational study. They didn't manipulate a variable. Actually, it was more of an observational study than a correlation, but I don't have that on your exam. Okay? In an experiment, you randomly manipulate a variable. So if he had done an experiment where he took the monkeys and half of them didn't have a mother at all and half of them had their normal mother, that might be an experiment. But this was more of a correlational study. In an experiment, you have to have an independent variable. Okay? Keep that in mind. All right. Couple of great guesses, though. Mr. Nixon and Anshika. Now, can somebody tell me what exactly does the suprachiasmatic nucleus do in the brain? Somehow or another, it's important in sleep. Can somebody tell me? I'm going to go ahead and leave that there and move on to the... Okay, so you'll notice we have 9 questions. So I'm going to ask you about these 8 brain areas. And then I want you folks to answer the question, which one of these case studies that we've talked about demonstrated the concept of plasticity the best? Holy cow, Lucy Purr and I'm Your Hero both say it's the master clock. Janice, what do you say?
Wow.
Fantastic again. Great job. We've got a lot of smart people here in this class tonight. Now, can somebody tell me, what does neuroplasticity relate to? Do you remember that term? We talked about it in chapter 3. I'm going to want you to know what that is, and then I'm going to want you to know which one of the studies that we showed this semester demonstrated the idea of neuroplasticity the best. Okay? Does anyone have any questions about chapter 3? Any questions about chapter 3? Okay. On to chapter 4. If you remember chapter 4, we were talking about sleeping and waking. Can somebody tell me, which sleep-related hormone does the pineal gland secrete at night? If somebody knows that, please type that in the chat bar and help the rest of the class. You'll notice that for chapter 4, all 4 of the questions are written in red ink. That means on the exam, these are the exact questions that you will have to answer. Okay? So I'm not trying to make it tricky here. And you'll notice, if you'll remember, we watched the video about DDOD. We got some melatonin. Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, Gloria's got a great answer for the neuroplasticity. And you're on the right pathway, Gloria, but I want you to take it a little bit further. Neuroplasticity is actually the ability of your brain rewire itself in case of brain damage. So your brain can actually, the neurons can grow and overcome problems. So if you, let's say, were to lose your eyes, what if you learned how to echolocate using your ears? That would be an example of your brain really, really reprogramming itself. But you were definitely on the right pathway. And you know what? Everybody is absolutely right. Melatonin is the hormone that is secreted by the pineal gland at night. Can somebody tell me, we watched that video about D. Dodd. Can anybody tell me what sleep disorder D. Dodd had? And while we're at it, if any of you know, what is the tool most commonly used in sleep research? Okay. So that's all we're going to do for Chapter 4. It really is these questions, so you're going to want to answer these questions directly. Okay? Narcolepsy. Lucy Purr is on fire tonight. Narcolepsy, absolutely. He falls right into REM sleep in the middle of the day. Does anybody remember, for double, triple bonus credit, does anybody remember what caused him to have his narcoleptic episodes? On Shika, EEG is the most commonly used sleep research machine. Fantastic. PET scans, maybe. Typically, PET scans are usually used when people are awake, and then they have the person do different things, and they see where the blood is rushing around in the brain. So PET scans are more for awakened research, and EEG is going to be more common for sleep research. But good guess, I'm your hero. Can anybody tell me what caused D. Dodd to go into his narcoleptic episode? Any emotions? Fantastic, Janaya. Fantastic. Excitement. Any extreme emotions? Now, for double, triple, quadruple credit, can somebody tell me what part of your brain is responsible for generating emotional reactions? I'm going to go ahead and slide on to chapter 5, if you don't mind. Somebody's going to type the answer in there. I know somebody's going to get the correct answer for that one. Let's see who's got it. Who's going to tell me what brain area that is? Okay. So, chapter 5, if you'll notice, for chapter 5, we've got 5 questions in chapter 5. I've got 4 bullet points, and as I told you, it will be 1 question per bullet point unless otherwise noted. And so you'll notice here in question number 4, you're going to be asked 2 things. Okay, somebody says amygdala. Bam! Lucy Purr on fire tonight. Fantastic. Ooh, Soyez is going to say the limbic system. The limbic system does include the amygdala, so I will have to give Soyez credit as well. All right, so for chapter 5, I'm going to want you to know what transduction refers to. And if anybody knows what transduction refers to, go ahead and type that in the chat bar for the rest of the class. And then, if you'll remember, I taught you about sensation and perception and the difference between sensation and perception. Sensation is the neural activity that occurs in your brain. Perception is what you make of that activation in your brain, right? And so and then I told you about Gestalt vision principles and monocular depth cues. I want you to think deeply about it and tell me, is the use of Gestalt principles an example of sensation or an example of perception? Mr. Nixon is absolutely correct.
Wow.
Fantastic, my friend. And Gloria Turner's got it right too. It is the process of turning external energy into patterns of neural impulses. Sound waves in the ear, light waves in the eye, chemicals on the tongue, or chemicals in the nose, or pressure. All of those are physical stimulations, and when your brain turns them into neural activity, that's called transduction. Fantastic. Okay, now here's the deal. I promised you, if you remember in chapter 5, I gave you these two weird pictures and asked you to analyze them and tell me what the gestalt and monocular depth cues were in those pictures. I hope you did that on your own and didn't chat GPT it, because I'm going to ask you to do that again for this exam. So I'm going to give you a picture much like this one down here, and I might ask you to explain the gestalt or the monocular depth cues. Can anybody give me a monocular depth cue for this picture down here? And can anybody think of a gestalt perceptual clue that you might see in this particular picture? It's a pretty picture that I found on the internet. Actually, no, wait a minute. I think one of you gave me this picture. Somebody from class gave me this picture. Okay. Let's see. And we'll roll on. Does anybody have any questions about chapter 5? Linear perspective. Boom. Okay, linear perspective. So Anshika's probably focusing on the fact that that pathway starts to narrow as it goes way away from you. That is a great example of the gestalt, or of the monocular depth cue of linear perspective. And continuity. So I guess what Lucy Purr is saying is that maybe these trees kind of bend over and you get the idea of an arch of the trees continuing into one another. That's an interesting one. I think you could group it by proximity or by similarity as well. Now, here's the deal. I'm not going to have you write this out on the final exam. So what I'm going to do with the picture is I'm going to ask you to pick out the clue. I'm going to give you the clue. So tell me an example of linear perspective. Which thing below here demonstrates linear perspective? The path, the trees, the leaves, or the benches, right? And I'll do the same thing with the Gestalt principle. I'll say the Gestalt principle of proximity. Is it the trees? Is it the pathway? Is it the leaves? And you'll have to be able to demonstrate that you understand those Gestalt principles and those monocular principles by identifying the correct example in the picture. One question for a monocular depth cue, one question for a Gestalt organizational principle. Any questions on chapter 5? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cruise on if you don't mind. Okay, chapter 6, behaviorism. If you remember, we talked about little Albert, we talked about Ivan Pavlov, the guy who conditioned the dog to salivate to a bell, to a metronome, and to a tuning fork. And if you remember, we talked about B.F. Skinner, and I asked you the question, is there such a thing as free will, right? And I think we may have watched, I'm not sure if I showed it to all classes, but we watched the video of the lady being treated for coulrophobia, the irrational fear of clowns. So chapter 6 was all about behaviorism. And if you'll notice, I have 5 bullet points here on this slide as well. So, can somebody tell me, what did John Watson demonstrate on his patient little Albert? If y'all remember, we watched the video about little Albert. So I'm going to want you to know what he demonstrated with little Albert. Now, also, in a behaviorism class, you're supposed to know the classical conditioning example that we described with Ivan Pavlov, right? So if you remember, in classical conditioning, there's an unconditioned stimulus which causes an unconditioned response. You pair it with a neutral stimulus, and then that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus, and it starts eliciting the effect, which is called the conditioned response. What did John Watson demonstrate with little Albert? Okay, Mr. Nixon, classical conditioning. Yes, he did. That's the principle. But what did he actually do to little Albert? That's what I want to know. What did he do? And there you go, Lucy Purr. Fear can be classically conditioned. Yes, Soyuz. Very good. Okay, fantastic. Mr. Nixon, you were giving a perfect answer. You were giving the academic answer. I was looking for the street answer, but all of them were correct. Fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example, and I want you to identify the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response, the conditioned stimulus, and the conditioned response. And I would use this picture right below me. I would use this picture right below me as a study guide in learning these 4 parts of the classical conditioning response. If you remember, we also watched the video of the dog learning how to turn on a light switch, if you'll remember that, in week 6. And so I want you to tell me, what exactly does a behaviorist mean when they use the word shaping? What does a behaviorist mean when they use the word shaping? Honestly, you could probably Google that and the answer will pop right up. And then go ahead and write that down in your notes and study that. All right, can somebody tell me, what would B.F. Skinner and other behaviorists say about free will and the mind? If you remember, we watched a video called Can Pigeons Talk? I want you to be able to tell me what B.F. Skinner and his buddies thought about free will and the mind. And then I'm going to give you an example. This will be a multiple selection question. Which of these are primary or secondary reinforcers? I won't tell you that. And then I'm going to give you 4 examples, and you're going to have to identify the 2 primary reinforcers or the 2 secondary reinforcers. I don't know if anybody can tell me the difference between a primary reinforcer and a secondary reinforcer. If somebody would, please type in the chat bar. Free will is an illusion. Absolutely, Renz. You are subject to your conditioning. If you like the color purple, it's because somebody dressed you in purple one time and your Uncle Nick patted you on the head and said, "You look good." And that made you feel so good that you decided to wear purple again. And Uncle Nick patted you on the head again. And suddenly you think you like purple. No, absolutely no free will. Does anybody know the difference between a primary and a secondary reinforcer? And feel free to give me an example of one or the other. Okay. You know what, let's see, behaviors are influenced by the environment. Very good, Rashida, too. Very good. I like, that's also a great way to say it. Fantastic. Rashida 2 and Renz both were spot on correct. Primary is innately rewarding, but second must be learned. Absolutely. So $20 is a secondary reinforcer. Fantastic. So on the exam, I'm going to want you to be able to differentiate between primary and secondary reinforcers. Okay. All right. Money would be a secondary. Fantastic. Absolutely. You are right on the mark, my friend. Fantastic. Okay. Chapter 7. Chapter 7's 5 questions. You'll notice that we have 5 bullet points, and you'll notice that 4 of them are written in red. That means these 4 questions will be on your final exam. All right. And we focus this chapter on talking about all the different ways you could be intelligent. We talked about we talked about 4 different theories of intelligence. We talked about classic IQ tests. We talked about Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. We talked about Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. And we talked about the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence. So in chapter 7, I'm going to ask you to know about those different forms of intelligence. Okay, so if you look right over here to my left, you're going to see the 2 parts, the 2 abilities measured on a typical IQ test. IQ tests measure your verbal reasoning and your nonverbal reasoning. So if you're good at puzzles, you can put pictures together and do that stuff. That's called nonverbal reasoning. And if you have a good vocabulary and can remember stories that you read, you have a good verbal IQ. So that's what IQ measures, right? Now, I skipped over. Can anybody tell me, what does it mean to say that an IQ test or a personality test is normed? Do you remember that? We talked about norms twice this semester. We talked about it in chapter 7 for IQ tests, and then we came back and talked about it in chapter 11 for personality tests. I'm going to wait for somebody to type in the chat bar and see if somebody can give me the answer. We've got some people coming in and leaving. All right, you turkeys, don't bail on me now. Stay. You got 30 more minutes. What does it say that an IQ test and personality tests are normed? Scores compared to a large sample and standardized. Okay, good enough. Basically what it means is you have information that allows you to compare yourself to other people. If you notice down here, I've got a picture of a normal distribution which shows how IQ scores compare to one another. You'll notice that an IQ score of 100 is right in the middle. That's average. That's okay. Don't be bailing on me now. Stay here. All right. So if your score is above 100, you're above average. If your score is below 100, you might be considered below average, right? Okay. And let's see. Can anybody tell me what are the 3 types of intelligence described by Robert Sternberg, and which one would be considered street smarts? Okay, I'm going to ask you to know which one of Sternberg's 3 parts. One of them is clearly street smarts. The other 2 are quite different. Okay? And then in your book, when it talks about intellectual change and IQ change across the lifespan, they talk specifically about fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. And I want you to be able to tell me what fluid intelligence is and what we mean by crystallized intelligence. Practical intelligence. Lucy Purr's on the money again. Fantastic.
Wow.
Oh, right. I know, Janice. She's kicking butt tonight. Fantastic. And then I am going to want you to know the difference between crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. And if you go look in your book or Google it, it'll tell you specifically what those 2 are and how they're different. Okay. I know I'm going kind of fast tonight. I do apologize. Hopefully, is this helpful so far? Am I making any sense online? It's kind of weird. I'm speaking right into a computer screen, so I wish I could see your face to know if I'm off the rails or not. But go ahead and give me a little feedback in the chat bar. Let me know how this is going for you. All right. Let's go to chapter 8. I don't know if you folks remember chapter 8. That's the memory chapter. And you folks were probably wondering, what the hell is he doing making us draw a picture of our house? You remember we were talking about rehearsal. Okay, fantastic. We were talking about improving your memory. Fantastic. Okay, a lot of good feedback. Now, I'm going to ask you to tell me what what is meant by the term rehearsal within cognitive psychology, not what rehearsal means. I know you got band rehearsal or play rehearsal. I'm talking about cognitive rehearsal. What exactly is that? Okay. And then we talked about two types of rehearsal: maintenance rehearsal and elaborative rehearsal. Okay? I'm going to ask you to know the difference between those two types of rehearsal, and I'm going to want you to know which one is more effective. Which type of rehearsal is more effective? Elaborative or maintenance rehearsal? Go ahead and type in the chat bar and let me know. And then, if you remember, I told you that you have no excuse for having a bad memory. If you tell your teachers you have a bad memory, it is your fault because you can train your memory. And so we talked about specific memory improvement strategies that you can use to improve your memory. You have no excuse for a bad memory. Okay? And we talked specifically about chunking, the memory palace, the mnemonics, and then I may have even, I think in one of the classes I even mentioned the place action object models for learning numbers. Does anybody remember what would you call the picture over here on the, let's see, I guess that'll be the left side of the screen. Over here, what memory technique does that picture demonstrate? I don't think anybody knows what elaborative rehearsal is. Uh-oh. Okay, fantastic. So these are the three questions. Now you'll notice there are 4 questions. I have to admit, I've forgotten which bullet points gets 2 questions. I think it's the examples of specific memory strategies. Remember, I told you that 1 bullet point per question unless otherwise noted? Here's my mistake. Oops. I totally screwed up. I am sorry about that. I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry. I was supposed to put 2 questions in parentheses on bullet point number 3. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. Life of Naya, Memory Palace, absolutely correct. Okay. Let's go on to Chapter 9. Chapter 9, we were talking about Harlow's monkeys and Mary Ainsworth's attachment studies, right? What we're going to talk about here, I want you to know what a critical period is, right? Do you remember we talked about Jeannie? Was Jeannie able to fully learn a language? Was she able to learn a language? Go ahead and type in the chat bar. And if she wasn't, tell me why. Okay? And if you can tell me why, then you understand what a critical period is. Okay? Now, if you remember, we talked about behaviorism as Chapter 6. Remember Soyuz? There is no such thing as free will. We are all products of our environment. So you cannot love your mother because it's in your soul. You must love your mother because she reinforces your love. Remember, no such thing as free will. So if a baby loves their mother, it's because the mother is reinforcing the baby's behavior. Can somebody tell me, how did Harry Harlow's research on monkey attachment challenge behaviorist ideas about the infant mother bond? Go ahead and answer that question for me. Fantastic, Mr. Nixon in the Life of Naya. Both of you were correct. You can only learn your first language in the first couple years of your life. Now, if you learn that first language in the first couple of years of your life, you can learn a second language or even a third language, as some of you students probably can. I think Rashida, too, told me she speaks 3 or 4 languages. And if you if you learn one language, you can learn a bunch of them. It gets harder as you get older. I'm trying to learn Spanish right now, and I am no bueno. But you can do it. But you have to learn that first one, right, in the first couple of years. Okay, fantastic. Now, again, does anybody know? So I want you to know what was special about Harry Harlow's monkeys. Why did they blow up behaviorist theory? What was wrong with their behavior that made the behaviorists seem incorrect? Anybody know? She wasn't able, she missed that. Okay, fantastic. J. Ford, Rashida too. We have a lot of really good answers. You folks are great when it comes to the critical period question. Fantastic. Now, if you'll remember, Mary Ainsworth, she did that strange situation experiment where she separated babies from their moms 2 different times. And remember, the babies always cried when they separated from mom. But what happened when they came back is what was important to her. Fantastic, Lucy Purr. Monkeys prefer comfort, not food. Attachment isn't about the reinforcement necessarily. Fantastic, Lucy Purr. Very good. Absolutely correct. Attachment. Okay. Yes, yes, yes. And Mary Ainsworth. Remember, Mary Ainsworth was really interested in how quickly the child could calm down. That was the key. A securely attached child can relax. They'll get scared when mom leaves, but they get comfort immediately. That means they have a secure attachment, right? And then I'm going to ask you what the most common attachment style that Mary Ainsworth found. If you remember, there was secure, there was insecure, anxious, ambivalent, insecure, anxious, avoidant, and there was insecure, anxious, disorganized. Which one did she find most commonly? And then if you remember, I made everybody do an adult romantic attachment scale to measure 2 of your romantic attachment qualities. You will have to, I'm going to give you a multiple, this is also another multiple selection question. I will give you 4 different qualities, and you're going to have to tell me which 2 qualities did we measure in class week 9. Okay? I'm going to slide on. By the way, if anybody has a question, don't hesitate to type in the chat bar, and I can always come back to that. So I'm going to speed along, but if I need to go back, I can quickly do that. Okay, Chapter 10, Motivation and Emotion. We have 4 questions. If you remember, we focused specifically on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, saying that all of us have different kinds of needs. And what need is most important depends upon your situation. If you remember, I told you that needs that are most important to you right now are what we call prepotent. Okay, I haven't had any food since lunch and it's getting kind of late. So I'm going to be honest with you right now. What's focusing my mind right now is my physiological need of hunger. I need a burger, right? If you remember, we said that this crazy fool, Alex Honnold, climbs mountains without any ropes. Which of Maslow's needs would he do that for? Okay, fantastic. I was thinking it was avoidant attachment. No, I'm sorry. Actually, it wasn't avoidant attachment. It's going to be the secure attachment is the most common attachment style. But thank you for playing, Naya. Okay, and then we talked about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. If you have a desire, something that comes from inside you, some people paint or play music because they feel a need to. That's intrinsic motivation. Other people go to work because they get a paycheck. That's extrinsic motivation, right? Can somebody tell me, is behaviorism a theory of intrinsic motivation or a theory of extrinsic motivation? Lucy Purr and Jay Ford, self-actualization. You are absolutely right. Alex Honnold is a self-actualizing nut. It will probably kill him one day, but he will feel contentment as he falls 3,000 feet. You are absolutely correct. The question is out there, is behaviorism an example of intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? Extrinsic reinforcement. Doggone it, Lucy, I can't ask you a question that's hard enough tonight. You are absolutely correct. Let's move on to chapter 11. 5 questions. 5 questions. Doggone it. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I did do it right this time. Okay, chapter 11 is on personality. Yes, Rashida 2 and Jay Ford, everybody's jumping on the extrinsic bandwagon. You are absolutely correct. All right, chapter 11. Remember, we did the personality testing lab that week. And we took 2 kinds of tests. We took a projective test and we took a self-report test of personality. I'm going to ask you to tell me what the difference is on the exam. So how is a projective test of personality different from a self-report? 4 descriptions, and one of them is going to be correct. And I'm going to follow that up by giving you examples of tests, and I want you to know which one's projective and which one are self-report. For example, can anybody tell me this test right here, the Big 5 personality test, we took the IPIP-NEO, which was the discount version of the Big 5, but the IPIP-NEO test that we took, was that an example of a projective test or a self-report test of personality? Very good. Fantastic. All right. So, you're going to tell me what a projective test is and how it's different from a self-report. And then we took some tests. You better know which one was projective and which one was self-report. 2 questions. Self-report, yeah, absolutely. The Big 5 was a self-report test. If you remember with the TAT, you wrote that weird story and I tried to guess your personality. Fantastic. Soyuz, Jay Ford, everybody is right on the money tonight. Fantastic. All right, now, then I'm going to ask you 2 questions. These should be gimmies. You better get them. If you know the 5 personality traits, I'm going to describe people, and I'm going to say, which personality trait is this? Okay? Remember, personality is an ocean. An ocean. And if you remember chapter 8, we talked about memory strategies. Which memory strategy is remembering the personality traits by saying they're an ocean? Is that chunking, memory palace, or the use of mnemonics? Okay, so you better remember these personality traits. If you don't remember the personality traits, it means you didn't do well on chapter 11, and doggone it, you didn't pay attention in chapter 8 when I was talking about memory strategies. So there. Okay. And then again, norm-related information. If you remember, we talked about what those numbers on your personality tests meant. What exactly does making a 50 in conscientiousness on the IPIP-NEO really mean? And Mr. Nixon and I'm Your Hero both chime in with the correct answer of mnemonics. Fantastic. Okay, chapter 12. We didn't have class this week. This is when we had that stinking, fall break. I had a teacher's work day, so we didn't cover chapter 12. I've provided this PowerPoint that I gave you's got 2 videos. One about Stanley Milgram. That one's over there on the left side of your screen. And then the one right below me is Solomon Ash's line judging studies. All right, I want you to know what Solomon Ash found in his study, and what Solomon Ash found in his study, and what Stanley Milgram found in his study. All right. Now, Very good, Lucy Purr. You are absolutely right. Means you are average. Now, if you remember, your assignment for chapter 12 was to tell me the difference between informational and normative influence. Sometimes we're influenced by others because we don't know what to do, and we follow the crowd because we are looking for information. Other times, you smoke a cigarette or take your first sip of beer. You know it's wrong, but you do it because you want to fit in with your teenage friends. That's normative influence, okay? So, I want you to know several things. Watch these two videos, if you would. And I want you to know, what did Stanley Milgram demonstrate in his shock learning experiment? What did he demonstrate about people in general? What did he demonstrate about people in general? And then I want you to tell me what Solomon Asch found in his line judging study. Okay? One of them is a great example of normative influence. It is a much better example of normative influence than the other one was. Okay? And Stanley Milgram actually did his shock learning experiment because he was interested in understanding the Nazi Holocaust, okay? When they had the Nuremberg trials, every one of the death camp workers, when they were on trial for killing the Jewish people for the genocide, they said, I was only following my orders, right? And Stanley Milgram asked himself, would people really kill because an authority ordered them to? And that's why he did his experiment. So what did Stanley Milgram find in his experiment? Would people really hurt somebody else on the suggestion of an authority figure? And down here, Solomon Asch, would people join a group that was clearly incorrect? So I want you to watch these two videos. You'll really like them. If you didn't watch them in week 12, you should definitely watch them this week. Okay? So those are the 5 questions. So you have to know what Stanley Milgram found, what Solomon Asch found, which one of those studies is a better demonstration of normative and informational influence, and then you need to know what normative informational influence is. And then if you look in chapter 12, they'll tell you a little story about the Holocaust and Stanley Milgram. Any questions? We are at the last slide, and it is 6:52. Look at that. If you remember, week 14, we saw my favorite health psychologist, Dr. Kelly McGonigal, whose positivity and energy is absolutely infectious. And if you remember, she talked about stress, and I pointed out to you that I was completely wrong. You know, trying to tell you that stress was bad and you should hate stress. And remember, we found out that was wrong. So here's what I'm going to want you to do for the final exam. We took 2 tests, one that talked about your daily hassles, which are called chronic stressors, and we also did that one on major life changes. I'm going to give you a multiple choice question, and you're going to have to pick the example of the major life change or the chronic stressor. Actually, I think this might be a multiple selection one too, where you have to pick the 2 stressors or the 2 life changes. If you remember, we talked about the hormone that's associated with the stress response. I talked about the difference between eustress and distress. They're both stressful, but one's positive, one's negative. And then, holy cow, what was the lesson that we learned when we watched Kelly McGonigal's video in week 14? Cortisol, life of Naya, fantastic. And what's the best way to avoid the negative effects of stress? If somebody answers that, we will be done. We will be done. What is the best way? I'm going to let you stew on that. By showing empathy to others, yes. But what was the mindset that she suggested? Doggone it, you're right, Anshika. By showing, I got to check and make sure I didn't put two correct answers on that one. Reframe stress is helpful. That was actually what I was thinking, but doggone it, Anshika is completely right because she talked about volunteering and its health effects. Good one. Fantastic. All right. Wow, that's cool. Well, that is the end of the exam review. I hope each and every one of you are ready for the exam. Come on, it's not going to be that bad. You had a great review, the test is pretty simple, and you are well trained, right? So this should be fabulous. We should be absolutely wonderful. Any questions? You're going to be fine, Lucy. I absolutely promise. Hey, until next time, have a great week, and I will see you hopefully in the future. Take care. Bye.